covering the Eagles each day and writing at 97.3 ESPN.com is our own John McMullen. He was at the Doug Pederson press conference where Doug was, for lack of a better term, exasperated with the media. We'll get into that, Doug's comments, as well as the Eagles' preparations to travel to L.A., where they are a double-digit underdog, according to the Vegas bookmakers. John McMullen joins us now on the Worldwide Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Henning, Nick Costco filling in for Mike Gill on a Friday. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing pretty good. So we obviously got to start with Doug Pederson and his, as you say, prickliness at the press conference. And John, you know, it's a balancing act, is it not? Because on one hand, you know, Doug, you know, he's trying to be transparent, but on the other hand, you understand that, you know, he's trying to protect his guys. He's trying not to give out information he's not supposed to. But at the same time, you guys in that room, you guys have to ask these questions. So in many ways, look, Doug can get as frustrated and as ticked off as he wants, but you know, this is part of the NFL world, is it not?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. Doug actually mentioned that in the press conference. He acknowledged this is part of his job as sort of.
But then he gets mad about it.
And yeah, I think that part's a little bit overblown. And I wrote about that today. I think Doug is kind of shooting himself in the foot. I know people don't believe this, but we have a really good relationship overall with Doug. There's no animosity. Sometimes he gets frustrated in these types of issues, and they've gone on all season, not just with Carson Wentz, but other injuries as well, particularly Darren Sproles. And you mentioned transparency. That's the problem. The Eagles aren't transparent in these types of issues, and there's no real upside to the way they act. I think that's the problem. And to me, for a guy from Doug Pederson, who obviously was schooled under Andy Reid, in these types of situations under Andy Reid, he would send out Rick Burkhalter, the trainer, to answer the medical questions. Eagles don't do that anymore. I don't know why they don't do that. And so Doug is left up there to contradict himself, which he constantly does in these types of issues, and it doesn't look good. And I've said that behind the scenes to them. They don't seem to acknowledge it. And I don't know, honestly, what they're trying to accomplish, but whatever they're trying to accomplish, they're not accomplishing it. So it's a little bit strange to me.
What is your rationalization or your explanation, being around that organization as you are every day, John, for why Carson Wentz is not on the IR? Why is he listed as questionable? Is this some sort of ploy by Pederson for gamesmanship, or is there some bigger reason why they're not just shutting him down for the year?
Yeah, I wish I could answer that question because nobody's buying it. Sean McVay and Wade Phillips and the Los Angeles Rams are getting ready for Nick Foles. Once the locker room opened today, Golden Tate, Nelson Aguilar amongst the players are talking about Nick Foles like he's the starting quarterback. And they're doing that because he's the starting quarterback. So I mean, what kind of gamesmanship are you trying to accomplish when nobody in the world is believing it? So there's no competitive advantage. There is no effective gamesmanship. So from that standpoint, again, I don't understand what they are trying to accomplish. And I said it with Darren Sproles specifically. So many fans question Darren Sproles because it was a hamstring injury, and they're saying, "Why is Darren Sproles not on the field? Why is Darren Sproles not on the field?" And we would constantly ask Doug about the injury. Is it anything more serious? And he said, "No, it's just a hamstring. He aggravated the hamstring. He had a setback." And then when Darren finally gets ready to get on the field and he's got to be in the locker room, he's got to talk to the media, he said he's dealing with more than a hamstring, which we all knew. So my point is, by doing this, the organization not only makes themselves look bad, they make the players look bad. It just doesn't make any sense And I've tried to come up with different angles to explain their behavior in these types of instances, and I can't really gather what they're gaining from it. If you want to go back to week 1 and week 2 and say competitive advantage because there was a chance Carson would be ready, I can buy that. But at this point, there's no value to it, and it's kind of painful to watch a coach have to go up there and shoot himself in the foot, and that's what Doug Pederson did today.
John, you kind of actually stole the words out of my mouth. The fact that it makes no sense as to what they're actually doing, how Pederson's handling the information as related to the injuries, and how he's saying Carson Wentz is questionable for this weekend, yet all indications are saying that Nick Foles is the starter for this weekend, likely for the next 2 weeks as well. The question was asked in the presser today about the medical staff. In your opinion, to me this has to be a legitimate issue as to why those 2 guys from the medical staff were fired after the Super Bowl last year, and now all these injury bugs are coming up. Everybody's dropping like flies. This has to be a legitimate issue, right?
No. And I'll tell you why. The medical staff
shot me down right away.
Yeah. Well, because they were rearranged because certain reporters got certain information that we weren't supposed to get. That's why they got fired. It had nothing to do with medical care. I mean, you look at Chris Dotson is their top doc, so to say, so to speak. I mean, he went to Brown. He used to be at the hospital special surgery in New York. He's been here for 6 years and got promoted. He's worked with other teams, the Dodgers, the Pirates, all across Major League Baseball. I asked everybody this, and I'll ask you guys. If I ask you who was the most famous sports surgeon of all time, I know who you're going to answer, but shoot, go. Who is?
James Andrews.
James Andrews. James Andrews is getting sued for $100 million by Sharif Floyd right now. It doesn't matter. My point is, it doesn't matter if you're a surgeon. At some point, you're gonna come across a patient who's not happy, and they're going to spin it in a negative direction. But from the Eagles' medical staff standpoint, this is not about misdiagnosing. This is not about forcing players to play. This is about messaging. This is about Howie Roseman wanting to control the message, and that's what it's about. It's not about the medical staff. It's about this organization trying to control information.
By the way, John, you and I both know that the most famous should be Frank Jobe and not James Andrews.
Well, you could argue Frank Jobe because of Tommy John surgery, but for now, for the newer generation, I think everybody would say Dr. James Andrews, and rightfully so. And now it's Jeffrey Dugas, and it's the Andrews Sports Medicine Clinic. But look, is anybody going to say he's a bad surgeon? Well, yeah, somebody is because they're suing him. But so the point is, and you saw it in social media, some ex-Eagles coming up and saying, and remember, that's an old medical staff, and they don't even know they've shifted things around.
Right. All right. I think we lost John there for a minute. Try to get him back up.
So one thing I was going to actually ask John, and just for your listening audience out there, it's kind of we have to go back to the actual on the field play for the Philadelphia Eagles, because you can talk about the medical issues all you want. You can say the medical staff is screwing things up. The injury bug has obviously hit this team in a huge way this year, more so than last year. They were able to overcome the injuries last year. And I just want for everybody out there listening, you have to realize last year they overcame injuries because they had their franchise quarterback playing at an MVP level. Carson Wentz elevated the talent of that team. I get they lost Darren Sproles. They lost Jason Peters. They lost a number of players. Chris Maragos was out for the year. Jordan Hicks was injured in the middle of the season, but they overcame that with stellar quarterback play, and they were able to step on teams' throats early and often in games. And they not to say they coasted, but they weren't hit with injuries in the places they are this year, where everyone's dropping like flies. Everybody's a year older now, and people have that bullseye on them, and they know how to beat this football team. So comparing this year and last year compared to injuries, it's worse this year because now everything's going against them because they're not that underdog anymore. And I believe we have John McMullen back, right, Josh?
We got John back. And John, we just wanted you to finish your point about, you're talking about how, for example, the famous one is Emmanuel Acho. He went on Twitter with his little rant, but you were mentioning about the fact that these old Eagle players are talking about the medical staff, but those people aren't here anymore.
Well, some are and some aren't, but it's shifted as a whole. I think, from my standpoint, I don't think it's a medical issue, as I said. I think it's I don't know how many surgeons can prevent a torn ACL. I think it's a messaging problem, and I think it comes from Howie Roseman. He makes these decisions, and as I said, he was angry about certain information that came out. But Dr. Chris Dodson, who's the head orthopedist for the Eagles, that's what I was saying. If any of us needed surgery, that's a guy that we would look at and say he's got a pretty good resume. So I'm not buying any of that part of it.
John, switching to on the field now, what the Eagles actually have to do in these last 3 games. I get they're still mathematically in the playoff race, and if a couple things break their way, they could find themselves as that 6th seed and playing a road playoff game in a few weeks. But with Nick Foles now leading the way at quarterback for the next couple weeks and presumably for the rest of the season, just because I frankly don't think Carson Wentz is going to play for the rest of the season now. People, and there are some fans that want to say that Nick Foles can recapture last year's magic, and I think they're frankly out of their mind. Now, can he be serviceable in these next 3 games and maybe they win 2 out of the next 3? Maybe, but I think whatever happened last year, they were just riding a wave of momentum that Carson Wentz left them, and henceforth, that's why Nick Foles was able to kind of shock everybody. I just don't see it happening this year.
No, I mean, it's completely different this year. If you want to argue Nick is the best closer, well, I said, he was the closer who had a 2-run lead last year and came in and nailed it down. This time he's coming in with a 2-run deficit. And if you do get lucky enough to make the playoffs, it'll probably be more because of Carolina's implosion or Minnesota's implosion than you playing all that well. I can't see the Eagles getting past 8 wins. If they sneak in, great. But remember, then all roads to the Super Bowl don't go through Lincoln Financial Field. So it's going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult, even if that happens. What you can say about Nick Foles, though, is, and I think it's fair, he's the best backup quarterback in football. And if you do need your backup to play, he's a good backup to have. And he's as good as you're going to get in that type of situation. I don't think it's going to help them in Los Angeles. That team's too powerful. Maybe they can scratch out a win against Houston, an upset win at Lincoln Financial Field, and then beat a Washington team on their 4th quarterback in Week 17. I think that's possible. And if they get to 8 wins, again, maybe the Vikings implode, maybe the Panthers implode, and that's how you get in.
John McMullen joining us on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow on Twitter at JF McMullen for all your Eagles and NFL news and updates. John, the Eagles have just come out with the status report, so I'll give it to you as I give it to the audience out there. Ruled out for this Sunday are Jordan Hicks, Tim Jernigan, Sidney Jones, and Isaac Seumalo. Carson Wentz is listed as doubtful, so that changed at least from Doug's conference this morning with you guys. And then questionable right now is Michael Bennett, Shelton Gibson, and Avonte Maddox. So, John, do any of those surprise you?
No, it was pretty clear, a little disappointing, but none of those guys practiced all week. And obviously, Sydney, another setback, Jordan Hicks not available. That's one of the reasons Eagles placed Jordan Mailata on injured reserve, got B.J. Bello, who's a linebacker, up on the active roster. Need a little more help at the linebacker position. Isaac Seumalo hurt his pec. He's been walking around all week with a a rap on his chest, and he's not been able to practice. So all those guys we kind of knew are out. It's interesting. Doug said Carson was going to be listed as questionable, and that he would travel to Los Angeles. So doubtful means, in today's world, very rarely do you play with doubtful. Everybody knows he's not going to play. I don't even understand why the Eagles want him to travel. If you think about any back problem on that type of lengthy flight, that doesn't even make sense to me. But again, I don't know what the Eagles are trying to accomplish. I would just shut him down and say it is what it is, and he's got a stress fracture in his back, and Nick Foles is the guy for the rest of the season.
So, John, on the field, what can we expect from the Eagles on Sunday? We know that, according to Vegas, this is now a double-digit favorite for the Rams. We know that the Rams are top 5 in the NFL in turnovers forced this year. So, offensively and defensively, this is going to be an uphill battle for the Eagles. What should we expect to see from the Eagles on the field on Sunday?
Well, offensively, I think you'll see some more RPOs. That's what Nick is comfortable with. Quick reads, get the football out of his hands quickly. And obviously when you're dealing with the Rams and their defense and Aaron Donald and Ndamukong Suh, you do want to get the ball out of your hands quickly. Defensively, it's going to continue to be an issue. Sidney Jones is not even going to attempt to play, as you mentioned, this week. So you're down your 3 top corners now. Jalen Mills gone for the year, Ronald Darby gone for the year, Sidney Jones not playing. Rasul Douglas is your cornerback 1, and then you kind of cobble it together from there. Crevan LeBlanc will be the slot corner, and then you got to make do with Devontae Ballsby and Chandon Sullivan, and that's not good when the other team has Jared Goff and Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks and Josh Reynolds and all the receivers, even without Cooper Kupp. It doesn't look good on paper.
John, one of the things with this Rams team is that, and I think it gets overlooked a little bit, is that, everyone talks about Aaron Donald, but I think one of the things that's been interesting is that when I was watching the Bears game on Sunday night, it was interesting to see how when the Bears were focusing on trying to slow down that Rams pass rush from getting to their quarterback, in many ways, you know the old saying, you run at the pass rusher, right? That's what they used to say about, the pass rushers back in the day. Well, it seemed like they were running away from Sue and Donald a lot. So do the Eagles have the personnel to get their backs and their players away from the pass rush of the Rams?
Well, I don't know if they can get away from the pass rush. I think they do need to sort of run the ball and control the clock. So you would hope that they understand you got to get Josh Adams involved early. Hopefully, this is a game, very rarely in today's NFL, if you win the toss, you generally defer and try to Bill Belichick and score at the end of the half, get the ball in the second half and score again. Everybody wants to do that. In a game like this where you're clearly outgunned, if I win the toss, I want to grab the football. I want to shorten the game as much as possible. And if that means going on a 7-8 minute drive, that would be perfect to start the football game. I don't think the Eagles would do that. I think they need to start to think, though, in those sort of methods and understand they have to shorten this game as much as possible, limit the possessions for the Rams as much as possible, and hope you're within earshot in the fourth quarter and try to steal it that way. If it turns into a Saints affair and you get behind quickly and you got to start throwing the ball, it's not going to be pretty.
All right, John, you can follow all your work at 973ESPN.com and follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. As we do each and every Friday, what is your score for the Eagles game?
Well, I had it 31-20 Rams with Carson Wentz if he was available to play. That's not going to happen, obviously. So I think it's going to be worse with Nick Foles. I think you're probably looking at probably a 34-14 game, something in that nature. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as what happened in New Orleans. But I do think the Rams have something to prove after that poor performance in Chicago. Just not a good spot for the Eagles.
All right, John. Well, we appreciate you coming on and you getting back on with us today, as it seems like your phone didn't like us there for a couple of minutes. You were making a great point there about the former Eagle players, the medical staff.
I make a great point when nobody hears it.
Yeah, and then we lost you, but we got you back. And, John, we'll be following you on Twitter throughout the weekend. Appreciate you coming on. Have a great weekend.
All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.